Gary Gallagher over here from University of Virginia. He wrote a book on the lost cause, and he could stand for 3 hours right here to talk about that. But I'll give you a quick synoptics of it. In the post-war defeated South, the South was in sort of a state of clinical depression, we might say today. Cotton was no longer bringing in money like it used to. Why the North during the Civil War found alternative cotton sources from Egypt and India. So there was a glut on the market globally, and a lot of Southerners lost their property as a result of the war, and they were sharecropping, and they were deeply in debt, never really making enough to survive. Per capita family income in the South didn't reach the 1850s again until the 1950s. Before the Army Corps of Engineers existed, in the 1920s, 1920s, the Mississippi River flooded a bunch of times. That destroyed a lot of Southern crops. There was the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. The South seemed to go through one economic slump after another, and it seemed like in the post-war years, all they had to do, it seemed like those who had been in leadership during the Civil War, it seemed like the only thing left for them was to talk about days gone by, about the Civil War, who was at fault, why they lost. And there was even kind of a crisis of faith. Think about if you've lost someone, a loved one, or someone you really care about, and maybe you're a person of faith, or you were considering it, and then you wonder why would a good God allow something like this to happen. So maybe you stay away from settings that have to do with God for a long time, or maybe forever. Southerners after the war were so sure, they were so sure before the war that they were in the right, that they were having to do some serious introspection after the war about why they lost. And so Confederate generals went on, and officers went on a tour circuit after the war, and they went to various Confederate chapters and gave presentations about what the war was about. And some wrote their memoirs, and they had their opinions on what the war was about. And collectively, all these things have been pulled together in a canon, and it's called the Lost Cause. It's a post-war, collectively, all these writings and all these speeches made by Southerners trying to explain why they lost and what they were really fighting for, as they were trying to get closure to the whole thing. Collectively, it came to be post-war apologetics. You've heard that term before. Apologetics is when you try to explain after the fact why something happened. And maybe you spin it to feel better about yourself, and you put a better face on it, and maybe there's some denials in there and things you don't want to admit to, but you come up with a story that helps you cope and go forward. So Southerners, some of the more prominent Southerners that helped create the Lost Cause were people like Jubal Early. He was a general here at Gettysburg. He made his speeches, he wrote his articles, he was an editor for a prominent Southern journal out of Richmond that published Southern articles after the war. He did not like General Longstreet at all, who led the attack on this part of the field that Johnston's reconnaissance was a prelude to. And so he let that be known, and he attacked Longstreet relentlessly. Longstreet would write back through northern newspapers and defend himself indirectly. And in the process, this canon of tenets to the Lost Cause came into existence. There was a fellow by the name of Edward Pollard. He wrote a book called The Lost Cause. Jefferson Davis wrote 2 volumes, the Confederate president, after the war, and woven all through it is the Lost Cause. So the Lost Cause, the short list of the Lost Cause was, Southerners said this, they said, again, in some cases in denial and in maybe even delusional, what they would say after the war was not about slavery, it was about states' rights, that slavery was, the words they would use is a benevolent institution, that they were good to their slaves. Again, that would assuage people's consciences. They said that the South couldn't win the war. That made Southerners feel better, too, that they were outmanned, outgunned. Logistically, it was impossible to win. And also a fourth tenet would that Lee and Longstreet were the 2 finest gentlemen that turned out in the war. You know, there were all these monuments to Lee and Jackson put up in the 1890s all through the South and on battlefields. And a lot of that was the outgrowth of the Lost Cause that said, we may have lost, but we had the 2 people that are shining examples of Christian behavior. You had no one on your side equal to these guys. And I think a lot of Northerners looked at it and said, okay, let them have that, you know. We don't necessarily agree. And then a 5th tenet to the Lost Cause was that General Longstreet lost the Civil War at Gettysburg. That's the essence of it. And primarily on the second day, but again on the third day when he should have made sunrise attacks. And there were people like William Pendleton, who was an artillery commander in Lee's army, who went around making speeches after the war, and so did Jubal Early, and they were relentless about this, and it was cruel, but they said that he should have attacked earlier. What fed into that idea was Northern newspapers publishing articles in Century Magazine in New York between 1884 and 1887, now republished in Volume 3, Battles and Leaders. That's the Gettysburg series. And writing to large Northern audiences, Southerners continued their argument, but Northerners also had their own articles. And when they wrote about the second day of the battle, they were mainly concerned about General Sickles moving out too far on this end of the battlefield against General Longstreet. And in the process, they played up Little Round Top as the key position, which Sickles didn't occupy. And that was the thing held against him. Is not only did he overextend his lines, but he didn't cover Little Round Top. And then that led to articles being written down at the lower level, at the colonel level, about how Little Round Top was saved just moments before the Confederates attacked. Strong Vince's men arrived maybe 10 minutes before Ball's Alabamians struck that part of the line. And that people like Joshua Chamberlain had to make heroic charges to save the hill. In other words, there was a hasty defense thrown up at the last minute. The implications were Little Round Top was unoccupied. And that was an indictment on Sickles. But to Southerners who were reading these articles, it said to them, my gosh, if it was only occupied 10 minutes before we attacked, couldn't Longstreet have found 10 minutes somewhere, in occupied Round Top? So it fueled the Confederate arguments. They took Northern arguments and added it to their own case that Longstreet could have saved at least a half hour somewhere along the way. Well, as all this attention focused on that tenet of lost cause in the post-war years, 1880s, 1890s, think about your 25th high school reunion, and it's the height of memory. Around your 25th anniversary, it's the height of sentimentality, melancholic feelings, warm, fuzzy feelings about the past. And so it was very popular around the 25th anniversary to dedicate monuments here. The monuments were put up here from 1880 to 1890, one reunion after another every weekend for 10 years. And in that climate, there was an appetite in the country to hear more about these controversies, Sickles, Longstreet. And as the story got more and more involved, at some point, someone mentioned among the Confederate writers of the time and speakers of the time, hey, there was an engineer. I think I remember his name. He's the one that went out and actually did the scouting for Longstreet's attack. Maybe he knows something. So 3 people wrote Samuel Johnston, and that I'm aware of anyway. And that's George Peterkin. He was a bishop in Richmond, Virginia, Episcopal Church. Eventually, he was a bishop in West Virginia. Became very interested in the war. He had participated in the war. Got interested in writing about these controversies. Bishop Peterkin. Also, Lafayette McLaws, who commanded 1/3 of General Longstreet's corps and 1/2 of his corps on the second day of the battle. McLaws' division. And then a third person that wrote was would have been Fitzhugh Lee, General Lee's nephew. And so each one of these people wrote Captain Samuel Johnston after the war to say, hey, look, if we distill this whole controversy down to whether Longstreet lost time or not, maybe you had a role in it. What do you know about it? And I'll just say this up front about Johnston. When he went to write, he would put little caveats in there. In fact, one of the final paragraphs that he wrote to Lafayette McLaws, he told him in so many words, I know why you're writing me. I know you want this information to, in so many words, maybe shift blame away from you, although that was implied, and shift blame to General Longstreet, who you don't like, who placed you under arrest that winter in Tennessee, and you've never really gotten over it. I don't want to, basically Johnston says in that paragraph, Longstreet was very good to me. Please do not publish this. The fact that I'm doing this tour today and reading his words and recounting his words, he would be horrified. And but in any case, Samuel Johnston became part of this whole larger story of lost cause, why the South lost the Civil War, and specifically why Longstreet didn't attack earlier on July the 2nd. So that's our first stop, and I want to break it up now, and watching home, we're going to start walking gradually south in the direction Johnston would do his reconnaissance. We'll say more about him specifically at the next stop. We talked about Samuel Johnston as a key figure in the second day of the battle and lost time, and we tied him into the much bigger picture of lost cause and what the Southerners were really arguing about after the war. Let's get to know Samuel Johnston a little bit now. Who was Captain Samuel R. Johnston? Well, he conducted reconnaissance at Savage Station, Malvern Hill for both engagements, Groveton, Manassas, Antietam, and Chancellorsville, all before Gettysburg. He served on Lee's staff and was detached to Longstreet throughout the war, being promoted to major on March 17, 1864, and lieutenant colonel on September 15, 1864. Jeb Stuart recommended Samuel Johnston to Lee, stating that, quote, he possesses remarkable qualifications for the post of military engineer. His recommendations are very high. I respectfully submit this special request on behalf of one of Virginia's worthiest sons. He is sober, tireless, and capable. Okay, so these are high recommendations from people like Jeb Stuart. Now, Samuel Johnston was 6.5 feet, with dark complexion and hazel eyes and dark hair. Hazel eyes and dark hair, and a dark complexion. It caused me to wonder, was he Native American? I guess we'll never know. But he's described as having a dark complexion and dark hair. Brigadier General Walter H. Stevens, post-war superintendent and engineer of the Mexican Imperial Railroad, wrote that Johnston, quote, has no superior as constructing and a locating engineer. Constructing and locating means that you find the best place in relation to streams for water stations, for ground that's sturdy for track, and for grades, so that steam engines couldn't climb steep grades. And he was considered to have had no one more superior than him at this. He lived in 13 states in the post-war. After 1888, he seemingly lived out his days in East Orange, New Jersey. By the way, a number of engineers went there because of the Industrial Revolution. Southern, Northern engineers alike. There was work there in the 1880s in northern New Jersey and on the outskirts of New York City. Now, Samuel Johnston said that he slept by Lee's side that night, presumably at Army headquarters. That would be at the seminary, which is northwest of us, a little over 2.5 miles to the northwest. The Lutheran Theological Seminary is the oldest seminary in the country, founded in 1828, had been 35 years of age at the time of the battle. Robert E. Lee set up his headquarters there. I've always felt that there was some correlation there between Lee and his own education background. Some of you know he was the superintendent of schools at West Point before the war. There were officers on the Union side that had received their diplomas in the 1850s from Superintendent Lee. Lee would later on be the president of what became known as Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. You all know that. And when he showed up and set up his headquarters within the shadows of the seminary and its main campus building, it's though he was non-verbally saying, the superintendent is here, class is in session, and the test has begun. But so Lee was there, and Johnston slept near him that evening. Between 4 and 7 a.m. on the morning of July 2nd, 1863, 155 years ago today, Johnston was told by Robert E. Lee that he was to scout out the area where Lee may make an attack on the far Union left, and that he was to go as far as practicable to the Union left. If you look at the ground and you see a shadow that your body will cast when we walk to the next stop, your body serves as a crude sundial, and that's roughly how they told the time. But if you're a farmer, if you're a shopkeeper of some kind, or if you're a military person, in those days you work from sun up to sundown. You make hay while the sun is up. So at 4:15 a.m., that would have been a good time for Samuel Johnston to take off. Now, when he went out on his reconnaissance, he mentions numerous times in his letters. And by the way, I'm going to do a synoptics. Synoptics is when you cross-compare letters. I mentioned the 3 letters earlier, to Peterkin, to McLaws, and to Lee. And those 3 letters, there were actually 4 letters, 2 letters were written to one man, but 3 individuals received letters in correspondence with Samuel Johnston. And I'm cross-connecting them, comparing them sentence by sentence. That's called a synoptic study, to try to glean as much information as I can. It's about all we have to go on from Johnston's perspective. And Johnston said that over and again, he said in his letters that he rode. So that tells us he was on a horse. By the way, he would have covered about 4 miles in one direction and about 4 miles back. He probably, conservative estimates, 6, liberal estimates, 8 miles he would have ridden that morning from the seminary out to the Round Top and back. And you couldn't walk that in 3 hours anyway, so he had to have been on a horse, but he specifically says he rode. My wife's an art teacher. She says paint the picture. There are always visual learners in the audience, so that's part of the brushstroke of helping your imagination. They were on horseback. Secondly, he said that he had, at the most, 4 individuals with him, so there would have been 5 in the party. In his letter with Lafayette and McLaws, you can tell there was a rift. McLaws argued with him, and clearly that caused Johnston to be more defensive in his correspondence with Lafayette and McLaws. McLaws I took a lot of heat after the war for losing time in the back country on what's known as the Longstreet Countermarch. He led that march. They lost probably an hour and a half having to turn around. He was holding a map that Johnston had put together, so he wanted to maybe shift blame rightly or wrongly to Johnston after the war, so keep that in mind. But Johnston wrote to Lafayette McLaws and he said, contrary to you believing that I had a detachment of 200 people, like you suggested I should have, I never went into reconnaissance with more than 4 or 5 people with me. And he said, General Lee taught me a lesson that he learned from the Mexican War, that you can learn a lot more and get a lot nearer to, these are exact quotes, nearer to the enemy and learn a lot more in smaller groups. Why would you have trouble learning a lot about the Union left before an attack against the Union left with 200 mounted men? Right. Noise, dust, Little Round Top Signal Station, Cemetery Hill Signal Station, Powers Hill Signal Station. They watched for Confederate campfires at night, and they watched for clouds of dust by day. Then they would send small contingents of cavalry out to debunk or affirm what they saw. They were like, you go to Walmart and it says cameras in use, and there's cameras above, and they're watching for shoplifting and hit and run. In a cruder sense, that's what Little Round Top was. And so the idea of getting near was directly related to not being seen. Now, let's talk a little bit about something closely related to that, and it's the technique that people who do reconnaissance and people who are involved in intelligence know, and it is, when you're doing intelligence, and these are precise words that Johnston used in one of his letters, he said the goal of intelligence is to see and not be seen. That's the key. When Donald Rumsfeld was here a few years ago, back during the war in Iraq, he visited the town, and one of our licensed guides took him on a tour. He went over to the Dobbin House, and people of all political persuasions knew he was a famous person, wanted their picture with him. There was several pictures taken over at the restaurant known as Dobbin House. That's where they went to eat. And later on, a couple of us on the staff asked the guide later, what kind of things did Donald Rumsfeld ask about? And the guide was quick to respond. He said Rumsfeld wanted to constantly know on his tour as they went through days 1, 2, 3 of the battle, he wanted to know what Lee and Meade knew at that moment. Because that's what you do when you're dealing with intelligence. And at that time, you all remember Homeland Security was just coming into existence. Rumsfeld told the guide, he said, our job when we're doing intelligence is to be able to scramble our opponents to be able to notice that we're watching them. And so that's what intelligence does, and those are the words that Johnston used. So Johnston, because he was trying not to be seen, he was traveling in a small group. You can get a lot nearer that way and not be noticed. He was also probably in civilian clothing, not in a uniform. There were a lot. By the way, there were a lot of people on the battlefield here that were hired as local guides, that were farmers, mostly on the Union side, but a couple for the Confederate side. For the right price, someone who knew the area could show you farm lanes and field roads that didn't appear on the 1858 Adams County map, which both armies had. So someone like Johnston could just fit in with other local people. Joseph and Mary Sherfy, we said, as late as 12 noon, they were in the Sherfy Peach Orchard, still trying to manage to stay there while the U.S. sharpshooters were shooting into these woods against Wilcox's Alabamians. So there were people holding out to the last, and Johnston could just fit in with them. Now, who was with Johnston on this reconnaissance? He tells us one other person in the synoptic study by name, and that's Major John J. Graham Clark. Major John Clark surveyed the Richmond and York River Railroad before the war. He aided in construction of Fort Drury below Richmond in May of 1862. Major Graham Clark was a post-war city engineer in Manchester, Virginia, and a bridge builder in Baltimore. Quote, he was described as a very handsome man, tall, well-formed, of commanding appearance, and few people would pass him without turning around again to look at him. So he would have been on a horse with Samuel Johnston as part of this small party to reconnoiter and get as close as possible without being seen or known about. Now, we would love to cross-compare Clark's account of this ride in the morning, except for after the war, he no doubt went to New Jersey for work like so many other people did that were engineers at the time. And while he was there in a bizarre train accident, he was killed in Paterson, New Jersey. He's buried in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. But so a silence fell on that side of the story. So who were the other three people? And why didn't Johnston talk about them in his letters? Now, I'm carefully qualifying this as theory because we don't have any set answer unless another letter turns up to add to the synoptic study. But these are a couple of theories I have, because when we're doing history at a higher level, or trying to, we must come up with a plausible theory. We qualify it that way, but we're to put up a plausible theory in absence of direct evidence. And so here's a plausible theory. Why he wouldn't have mentioned the other three people with he and Clark. One reason is, you all know this about intelligence people, they don't want their name out there in public. It's dangerous. You fill in the blanks. That's not for this tour. You fill in the blanks on your own. You pick the decade. You pick the, so that we're not specific. But anytime someone in our intelligence circles at the national level comes into the limelight, you'll rarely hear anyone else's name around them specifically dropped. Right? If someone is sequestered, then maybe a second name will come out. But their job depends on remaining secret, even in retirement. I know that there have been a couple of CIA folks who come out on my battle walks over the years. And Bill, you know them, and they've told me on the side various things I've had. There's a fellow here that's Secret Service that comes out periodically on our tours. They can't talk about where they've just been. And if they talk about where they've been with the president or whatever, it's very vague about the timing, and you have to sort of fill in the blank. So for Johnston to mention names, that would be an ethical problem for him. And the reason why he mentioned any names is that he thought he was writing in private. He was writing in private. Instead, now, of course, we're way beyond that time period now, and everything's declassified, so I guess it's okay to mention these names. But he would have been real picky with mentioning the other name. Now, there's another theory as to why we don't know these other three people's names. And it could be they were local guides that were hired to go with them. That was not uncommon. And we could talk about specific names of specific people that were hired here on the battlefield to help generals that you know real well. But there, just trust me, it was quite common. So these individuals remain incognito for all those reasons. And they took off around sunrise, and they started riding, and we'll look out in the distance. And you can see the South Mountain out there, and PCN cameras are getting that for us. That's about 17 miles west of us. They weren't that far west, but that was the mountains that brought Lee's army from your left to right, from Virginia up through Maryland into Pennsylvania, and then in reverse back again to Virginia. That was the Plum Bob chalk line that guided Lee's army from Cumberland Valley on the other side of the mountains into Susquehanna Valley, where we are now. A month before harvest time, they gathered up a lot of supplies. That's not a coincidence. And in the foreground, the camera may or may not be able to pick this up. You can see a small farm over to your right, and just beyond that farm is a thick layer of trees, and that thick layer of trees is covering a stream called Willoughby Run from your view. Willoughby Run. And then just beyond it, there's another screen of trees blocked out of your view, but just a little bit further to the west and parallel to it is Marsh Creek. Those two water sources were the main Confederate water utility hookup for the Confederate Army. That's where all their hospitals were. Everybody that was wounded in the Confederate attacks on July 2nd and 3rd, that's where they went back to. That's where the water source was. Lee's battle line here along Seminary Warfield Ridge was directly in relationship to covering the water that he needed for his hospitals, for firing his artillery, for sponging them between rounds, for his army of 68,000 effectives to be able to fill up their canteens. The Confederates had 30,000 stolen hogs here, 20,000 stolen sheep, and 20,000 cows that they had taken that they would slaughter and feed their army for the next 3.5 months. And all of those animals drink up to 6 to 8 gallons of water. The Confederates also had 40,000 horses and mules pulling miles of ambulance wagons, ordnance wagons, artillery vehicles, and they had wagons filled with the equivalent of 700,000 pounds of hay and oats daily ration to feed all the animals that I mentioned. So as I like to say, it looked like Noah's Ark back there. But that would have been the logistical area for the Confederates. And the Confederate Army was in front of all those logistics, not by coincidence. And the escape route was carefully covered by cavalry pickets and whatnot all the way back to the mountains, so when they withdrew, they could get out of here with all that produce and with all those supplies. So Johnston and his party of 4 rode along the tree line of Willoughby Run and also the parallel tree line of Marsh Creek over in this direction. Now Garrett Cost, who is a second-year history student at Gettysburg College, is here to help me all throughout the tour in innumerable ways. Let's give him a round of applause. And he's going to hold up a map, and we'll pass it around. In fact, if you would, Garrett, at some point pan it in all directions, but make sure the camera gets a good shot of it. This is a map done by Philip Lano. I highly recommend it. I would say he's among the best map makers related to Gettysburg, and there's several good ones, outstanding ones, as you all know. But this is from Philip Lano's Book of Maps, and it depicts the early morning of the second day of the battle, which is the focus of our program here today. And I've tried to crudely draw in some parts of the map that would be beyond its borders, so that you can see the obscure roads that Johnston did his reconnaissance on. And over on the far left of your screen, you all can see a black mark that runs vertically north-south, has a red bridge running across it. And again, we're going to pan it, and between stops come up to Garrett, take a closer look. There'll be plenty of times to cross-examine it. We'll show it again and again and again. I even have a magic marker that's erasable to draw on it like an easy board marker, so that we'll add to it along the way. But this outer border that you see that I crudely marked in, that would be Marsh Creek. And then the smaller line that Phil Lano has in there, that's Willoughby Run, so important to the first day of the battle, part of the Confederate utility hookup. And then you see Pitzer Run. So Pitzer Run and Willoughby Run are branches of the main Marsh Creek that was incorporated into the Confederate defense here at Gettysburg. Johnston said that he indicates he did both a route reconnaissance and an area reconnaissance. And I'm going to talk about that in our next stop as to what both would be. I would say before we go, again, take a panoramic view out there to your front. And I want you to see, there's one other point I want to make to you, one other focal point I want to point out to you before we go into kind of a little bit of a wooded area. Can you see the bus descending down the hill? It's turning into the Eisenhower farm. Can you all see that? Right, the Eisenhower farm is over to your left, where Dwight and Mamie Eisenhower, of course, Mamie Eisenhower lived off to your left. Now the bus is moving through a corridor of trees, which is the stately interest, to Mamie and Dwight Eisenhower's home. Can you all see that white bus? Perfect timing. Just beyond that white bus and beyond the trees, in the lowest ground, is Sachs Bridge. And we're going to say something about that at our next stop. It's going to directly relate to this reconnaissance. Okay, and so here we go. And so Johnston went out on his sunrise attack, sunrise scouting mission for the later July 2nd attack by General Longstreet on the Confederate right, Union left. And that sunrise reconnaissance was between about 4:15 a.m. and around 7 a.m. They were on horseback. There were 5 of them. If you're just joining us, we said this is related to big picture, post-war lost cause, pinning blame on Longstreet for losing time on July 2nd. Does Johnston know anything? Is he responsible? And so that's our story here today. Well, as Garrett brings forward the map again, I'm going to introduce a part of the story that's really fascinating as you do the synoptic study of the letters that Johnston wrote to Peterkin, Lee, Fitzhugh Lee, and to in Lafayette McLaws. And what comes out in those letters in the synoptic comparison is Johnston said that he crossed a bridge. Well, that locates where he was. Now, that allows me to say this to you, for those that don't know the story real well. Johnston's movements have been somewhat of a mystery over the years. Where did he go? And if you're very interested in whether Longstreet lost time or not, it's important to know that Longstreet's attack was based on where Johnston went. And if we're not real clear where he went, then that adds more ambiguity to the whole Longstreet story, you know, and the idea of losing an hour and a half on a countermarch where they had to turn around because they seemingly didn't know where they were going. That points back to Johnston. So in the synoptic study, I'm trying to find precisely where Johnston was and add some clarity. And he says that he crossed a bridge. He told McLaws that he crossed a bridge. And that tells us a couple of things that are very important. If these 5 men crossed a bridge, it tells us that they couldn't ford that area. It also tells us they crossed water. That would place the reconnaissance along Marsh Creek. You could easily ford Pitzer Run. You could easily ford Willoughby Run. You could just cross it today. You and I would barely get in our feet wet, except after heavy rains, and even then, maybe just our ankles. The only place on this reconnaissance and later on the march by Longstreet's corps to get into position to attack the Union left, the only bridge is Sachs Bridge. How many of you have heard of Sachs Bridge? It's where the high school students go and get their senior pictures taken locally here at Gettysburg High School. It's also where people have weddings. My sister-in-law got married on the bridge. I still have memories of helping unload a pump organ off a pickup truck into there for a temporary thing. So I have, vivid memories of the place. But it's beautifully restored. Highly recommend that you go there. People are fascinated by covered bridges. There were a number of covered bridges on the battlefield, not just this one. But this is the only one left. There is one about 12 miles west at Jack's Mountain. People go to visit that one too. And then there's Sachs Bridge. And there's always requests every day to go down and see it. It's just gorgeous. Buy yourself some lunch sometime and just go down and sit and watch Marsh Creek flow under it. It's a gorgeous place to spend an afternoon. There was another one, by the way, across Rock Creek over near Coltsville along Hanover Road. It was there during the battle. Soldiers talked about it. Why would they have covered bridges? Let's stop and talk about that for a minute. Because horses get real jittery when they cross a larger body of water. If they look down and see the water, they can get nervous. right? And that's one reason why you put blinders on them with a covered bridge. Also, when it's heavily raining, it's a place to have a shelter. My son and I played golf the other day, and it started thunderstorming, and we went to a shelter. He knew there was a shelter, and of course we went there, and there were 15 other carts parked under the shelter. So Sachs Bridge would be a place for people to wait out a storm, as well as a place where a horse wouldn't be easily spooked. And so he said he crossed the bridge. Well, there's only one such bridge across a body of water that you couldn't ford, and that's Sachs Bridge. That locates him. He says that to Lafayette McLaws, he said during his return back to see Lee after the reconnaissance, he recrossed the same bridge. Those are his words. And he said, I went back to find Lee regardless of where the fences were. He talked about crossing fields and lots and just ignoring fences. I suppose along the way the horses either would have jumped them or moved them or found gaps in them. That tells us in reverse. You can tell I've thought a lot about this. That tells us in reverse that the reconnaissance did abide by fences and that they largely stayed on roads. So they crossed this bridge, and now Sachs Bridge, let's take a closer look at it. Garrett's going to... That's the Sachs Bridge, and he's going to pan it so you can see it, but first he's going to hammer it. Exactly. And this photograph was taken by Brian Steinberger. Brian Steinberger. He's a photographer for Paul Selmer and the Gettysburg Frame Shop. How many of you have heard of the Gettysburg Frame Shop? Paul Selmer and the Gettysburg Frame Shop have one of the best, not only frame shops, but Civil War art collections that they sell anywhere, period, on any battlefield. If you're walking downtown this evening around the town square and you walk down Chambersburg Street, a few doors down from the town square, go into Paul Selmer's frame shop and buy somebody a painting of a Civil War scene for Christmas, okay? I know it's still 6 months away, but 5 months away or what have you. But keep that in mind. Paul Selmer put this together for me on foam board, and he did it on short notice, and he does it for me every year. And so Brian actually took the photograph of it. So he crossed and he recrossed, but on the way out, that meant they would have stayed within the framework of the fences. Now, I left you with a tease at the last stop, whether this was a route reconnaissance or an area reconnaissance. Maybe I didn't set it up as a question then, I'll set it up as a question now. Internally within our staff, I've heard debates among the Rangers on whether Johnston did a route reconnaissance or an area reconnaissance. And in fact, I walked in on a real heated one. These two people love each other, but this was a heated argument that I walked, and they eventually just separated. They couldn't agree. So that piqued the interest of the younger staff to wonder what's a route reconnaissance and what's an area reconnaissance. All right, route reconnaissance is what you would think. Logically, it is looking for routes in your scouting mission that the troops that are going to make the attack will follow. In other words, you're going to find the egresses for them to make the attack, in this case on the Union left. And by the way, in case I forget to say this, if you're watching at home, there's Big Round Top and Little Round Top. We picked a doozy of an excellent background, didn't we, for our stop, you know. So if you're making a reconnaissance in the direction as far as practicable to the Union left, that's the area of the Round Tops. Is it a route or area reconnaissance? Area reconnaissance is you're looking for topography, you're looking for the lay of the land, where artillery should be positioned, the water that the men need to fill up their canteens with. Keep in mind that when the Confederate artillery came into position on this ridge where we're standing to support Barksdale's Mississippi attack and Walford's Georgia attack in the direction of the peach orchard directly opposite of us and east of us. And when Manley and Cabell's batteries and Henry's batteries and all these battery is 4 guns in the Confederate Army, all these batteries came into line to your right along this ridge line known as Warfield Ridge to support Longstreet's attack on July 2nd. And then they fired against Dow and Phillips and Ames and Clark and Bigelow and all the guns on the Union side under Randolph and under from the artillery reserve as well, McGilvery's guns. During the 2-hour bombardment that occurred from here to the Peach Orchard and back, which went on about 2 hours, between the two sides, conservatively, they would have used 10,000 buckets or pails of water to fire back and forth at each other. These are little round discs. They're metal. We could call them a pail. We could call them a bucket. You dip a sponge that looks like a giant Q-tip between each round and fire that and ram that down into the barrel of the gun. That quenches the old round, the old fire, the embers that are in there. And then you clean out the crustacean because it quenches really quick. Whatever is put in there dries really, really quick. And that prepares it to put in a fresh round so it doesn't prematurely explode. You have to put out the embers of the previous round before you put in a fresh powder round. Does everybody see that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're constantly sponging these guns. And the bronze guns, a lot of the Confederate guns were Napoleon III brass bore guns, and they would turn red. They got so hot. And sometimes the structure would be compromised. They might even crack. But you put water down that barrel over and over and over to try to keep it cool so that you can continue firing over and over. And so there would have been steam coming out of those guns and rivulets of water all around the guns. And both sides would have done that. If you're talking about 10,000 pails of water being used in a bombardment, that means you need water on the way over, don't you? So if you're doing reconnaissance like Johnston was, you have to find a route that the 60 artillery pieces that you have are going to take to come over, get into position. They need to fill up barrels of water before they get over here. Can everyone see that? So that's part of area reconnaissance. You're looking at water needs, you're looking at topography needs, and then the last part of an area reconnaissance is you look for your enemy's position. And if you all were with me the other day on the tour that I did on Geary's position versus Sickles' position, and we went on and I think about 2.5 hours or so on that. We're not going to go into that definition because it takes a long time. But a position means you're set up and ready to fight. And so what Johnston would have been doing is not only looking for routes to take for Longstreet's corps of 13,000 men to make an attack without being seen by the signal station, but you were to look at the area and find out where the water is that resupply all the men's canteens and resupply the barrels of water for sponging and firing artillery. You also have to pick ground that's suitable for your artillery to have a line of sight to be able to fire. And you have to find exactly where your enemy is located so specific plans can be made. And so I'll go ahead and kind of give this away a little bit early in saying to you that this was both. It was both an area and a route reconnaissance. Now, I was reading a Confederate account, maybe 2 months ago. It surprised me, I didn't expect to see it. But the Confederates said that it just really ticked him off. That little round top, that's the smaller of the two hills to your left out front there, the far Union left. That's where Johnston's reconnaissance would go to. It really ticked him off that Longstreet's men in their march over to make the attack over here later in the afternoon, it really ticked him off that he had to constantly be aware that there was a signal station watching you. And the idea was, he indicated, if you read between the lines, that he knew that most of the time it wasn't possible for the signal station to see him, but every once in a while it would blindside him in his thought process. Was I seen? Was I standing too high? Should I have gone up on that hill? Because the moment you're spotted, that was the orders from Lee to Longstreet was, and Johnston would have helped set this up by finding secretive routes, was do not be seen by the signal station. If you're constantly aware you might be seen, that means you're over-exaggerating your movements and you're probably frustrated, and that's one of the reasons why they turned around, because they thought they were seen. It's just the awareness that someone's spying on you, and you have to be very careful. The other aspect that you have to be wary of with not being seen is element of surprise. The reason why Longstreet was told by Lee, do not be seen by the signal station, is the moment that you're seen, the element of surprise is gone. If the Confederates maintain their movement of 13,000 troops to this ridge and set up their artillery and start firing, and there's been no forewarning, there's going to be about 30 minutes where they benefit. A window of 30 minutes where there's an element of surprise. A 30-minute window where the Union Army is trying to catch up to the curve, where they're trying to throw troops in to make up for something they were unprepared for. McLaws criticized Johnston in a paper that he was writing. He never published it. I have a copy of it. He never published. I guess he thought better of it in the end. He decided to respect Johnston's wishes and not put his name out there, so it wouldn't be until years later when people were researching the archives when they found it. But McLaws said, he said, Johnston wrote me a letter where he admits that Lee never gave him specific orders to find a route for me to take. And he said, I was holding a piece of paper supposedly written by him. And he says in a letter to me, Johnston says to me, McLaws, that Lee never gave him specific orders to look for a route for my movement. What he's suggesting is, look, hey, we lost an hour and a half, have to turn around. And Johnston's already admitted to me in a letter that Lee didn't give him specific orders to look for a route. But he misquoted Johnston. If you go back and look through the synoptics and you carefully look through each of his writings, and particularly his letter to McLaws, he says, Lee never told me to look for a route because it was understood that I would look for a route. He said it was understood that I would look for every contingency. He said I was in Lee's trust for years. He said I always looked for a route. He didn't need to tell me basically how to do my job. Basically that's how Lee functioned anyway. If he hired you for something, he didn't make you small by then suddenly micromanaging you and telling you how to do something you've known how to do for years. And so he said it was understood that I would look for every possible contingency, including the route and the area, that I would look for the enemy's position, that I would look for the best routes to take. And so he came back hard at McLaws on that one. So now one last point I want to make, and then we're going to cross the road. This, I know we're getting tired and hot, and it's probably creeping up towards the 90s now. I'm feeling pretty good, you know. But okay, I hope you all are. You know, trying to keep all this straight. But this is a really neat point, a fascinating point that I've been waiting to build up to share with you, and it's this. And the back and forth arguments that McLaws had with Johnston as he was writing his paper. By the way, if you want to read his paper, it's in the Park Archives, and it's called Fragments, a paper on the fragments of the Battle of Gettysburg. You know, that's what to my knowledge, it was never published. If it was, and it may have, I'll stand corrected and be happy to, but to my knowledge, at least in the form that I looked at it in, it wasn't published. Now, in their little spat back and forth, McLaws and Johnston, McLaws wrote in his paper, after reading Johnston's correspondence, he said, Johnston said Longstreet's command crossed the bridge, the same bridge that he crossed in his reconnaissance. McLaws said, my command never crossed any bridge. And that's what he said. That's what he said. And he's mad. He's mad that Johnston says in the letter to McLaws, hey, in my route, I crossed that bridge. I crossed it one way, and then on the way back, I crossed it, regardless of fences, to get back to Lee as quick as I could. I crossed that bridge twice, and Johnston said it's the same bridge that Longstreet crossed in his march. And McLaws writes in his paper, I never crossed any bridge. In other words, this is bunk, you know, this is no good. But, oh my goodness, that's wonderful. If you, maybe this is a sickness, I've thought too much about it. but I thought, oh my goodness, that is so wonderful. How many of you all, I'm getting ready to give this away, how many of you all know that Edward Porter Alexander, who was in charge of all of the artillery that was placed along this bridge to support the attacks against the Peach Orchard, Wheatfield, Devil's Den, Little Round Top. How many of you know that when McLaws stopped and they lost about an hour and a half in the back country, not being seen by Little Round Top, having to snake through low ground and and under cover and concealment lost an hour and a half attacking over here later than was expected. How many of you know that Alexander got here at 3:30? The attack would start in earnest closer to 4. He got here at least at 3:30. It might have been 3:15, 3:20, and had enough time to ride back to the troublesome hill where McLaws had stopped because he could see Little Round Top and he feared they saw him, and so they would have to retrace their steps to stay out of view of Little Round Top. How many of you know Alexander got here really early and had enough time to ride back and be in the presence of McLaws when he and Longstreet were arguing about how to correct the situation and still get over here unseen? How many of you know that? All right. Edward Porter Alexander was there long enough that he listened to the disagreement between McLaws and Longstreet, and what they should do about this hill and how they should circumvent it. And Alexander turned and said something to someone beside him who was of authority. He said, they're looking for a solution to not be seen by Little Round Top. Why don't they just take the route I just took with the artillery, these 60 artillery pieces? How many of you know that story?
Yeah.
And he said that to someone beside him, and he mentions that in a book later published, edited by Gary Gallagher, called Fighting for the Confederacy. It was written in the mid-1880s, but published many, many years later. And Alexander says in there, they should have took the route that I took, and he says, I told an officer there that they should have taken the route I took, and they wouldn't have been seen, they wouldn't have lost any time, they wouldn't have to turn around, and they had all these troubles. And by the way, Alexander never revealed who he said that to. And for years, I thought it sort of undermined the credibility of the story. But it finally hit me when I was doing this Johnston research, why he didn't give that name away. He knew there was a controversy swirling in Law's cause over who lost minutes to attack the Union left on July 2nd. And if he mentioned that man's name, I told someone McLaws should take the route I took. If he mentioned that in any of his publications, that person's going to receive a lot of letters for their memoir. Do you see what I'm saying? Which will inflate the whole discussion a little bit more. So for protective purposes, he never mentioned the man that he said Longstreet McLaws should take the route I took. Now, the question then over the years has been, what route did Alexander take? And we've never really known. Harry Fonz, in his excellent book on Gettysburg the Second Day, went out with Bob Crick, an old boss of mine in Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, National Military Park in the late 1980s. Two outstanding people and historians, and they came up with a logical explanation for where Alexander went, and it was that Alexander, when he got to the troublesome hill, which is almost 2 miles west of him, and they could see Round Top, that he turned right to miss the hill, went around it, and came out on the other side and followed Field Lane or Farm Road, reconnected with Black Horse Tavern Road, which snaked over to this part. It's very logical. However, there's another possibility, and the other possibility is when Johnston said to McLaws, I crossed the same bridge that Longstreet crossed. I believe what he's suggesting, and I think it's very plausible, is since Longstreet's 2 divisions, McLaws and Hood, didn't cross that bridge, and McLaws was right, his command didn't cross that bridge, the artillery crossed that bridge. That's where they were. That's the route that Alexander told an officer beside him, that's the route I took without being seen, that's the route they should take. So, now let's look at it on the map. We see Marsh Creek. The reconnaissance would have started at Marsh Creek because that's where all the troops were encamped. That's where McLaws Division, Hood's Division, Longstreet's Corps, that's where they were encamped on the creek to fill up their canteens, to bivouac since the night before. And the infantry, McLaws' division, followed this road that we see here. It's called Black Horse Tavern Road. Some of you walked that with me. I do a walk out there. And then when they got to Troublesome Hill, which is on the far left of this map, they thought they were seen by Little Round Top, which is here. You can see Little Round Top literally in the background. what Alexander suggested was they should go around the hill. Fonz very logically suggests that they would have gone around the hill just far enough to re-access this road known as Black Horse Tavern Road, which would have brought them opposite the Peach Orchard, very near where we are. However, since Johnston says Longstreet's command crossed the same bridge that I crossed twice, the only part of Longstreet's command left eligible to cross that bridge would have been Edward Porter Alexander. Edward Porter Alexander's artillery guns, eventually 60 altogether, if you count all of the battalions that came up eventually, followed Black Horse Tavern Road and crossed Marsh Creek at a place, for those of you that like these kind of details, at Brames Mill. That's where James Kemper was treated, the future governor of Virginia. It's where a lot of Pickett's division was taken back along Marsh Creek to be treated after Pickett's charge. Crossed at Brames Mill. There's a real low area there, and I've been invited to go out and walk it with a party of people. I hope to do it again soon. But you can go across a real low portion of Marsh Creek at the mill where the water tables are manipulated for a dam there, and come out onto a road that runs along Marsh Creek on its west side. Gettysburg Campground is there today, and it's a road that runs parallel with Marsh Creek north to south. And then that would have allowed them then to come out at Sachs Bridge and cross Sachs Bridge. All the horses would have been able to cross Marsh Creek in a sheltered bridge, and they would have been low enough they would have never been seen by Little Round Top Signal Station. And so Alexander went somewhere. We've suggested in recent years, Fonz's book suggested in recent years, it was an immediate turn around the base of the hill. There's a house there known as the Crawford Farm, and nearby the Currens Farm. Dr. Gabor Boric lives in that area, former history professor at Gettysburg College. What I'm suggesting to you is that farm lane was so primitive, it would have been better for all those wheeled vehicles and their ammunition trains to go across the Sachs Bridge. And our clue, as Samuel Johnson says to McLaws, Longstreet's command crossed the same bridge I crossed in my reconnaissance. McLaws and Hood didn't, those two divisions didn't. That leaves one other eligible body of military men, and that would be the artillery. Okay, so fascinating stuff. He crossed the bridge, and then he said he then came up upon the Confederate skirmishers, and he said half of his reconnaissance was behind that skirmish line. So at our next stop, we're going to look at the skirmish line. Okay, how's everybody holding up?
Great.
Okay, that's nitty-gritty stuff. Okay, and if you're following at home, we've gone a little bit further along Seminary/Warfield Ridge, further south to where Longstreet's troops eventually would launch their attack, and we're specifically standing where the artillery would support that attack. And we've been following Samuel Johnson's reconnaissance and looking at all the particulars of how he scouted out this area so that Longstreet's troops would know where to go to make an attack that came to be seen as pivotal during the war. And so as we do this, there are a couple of finer points I need to revisit. And one of them is, if you can't see this, Garrett will show it to you between stops. TV cameras are going to get it though pretty good, I think, here. And that is, I'm drawing with a green marker in a small circle, and that's the troublesome hill that Alexander talked about, where McLaws, who was leading Longstreet's movements in the afternoon to get into position, element of surprise, and attack, that was the hill where he could see the red flags waving on Little Round Top that they used to signal other parts of the Union line. And it was, oh my gosh, we're seeing that if we can see them, they can see us, which caused the Confederate columns to stop and backed up for 3.7 miles. Longstreet wondered what was going on, and so he rode to the front of the column. He was not at the front. He was leaving McLaws alone to maneuver the best way he could over to the Union left. But when the traffic jam occurred, Longstreet rode to the front from the halfway point of the march to the front of the march to find out why it had stopped. And he found McLaws riding back to him, and they intercepted each other and then rode back up to where I drew this green circle, the troublesome hill known as Brames Hill, where they were suddenly revealed in front of the signal station. And so the two men had their conversation there. We said Edward Porter Alexander showed up and said to an officer beside him, why don't they go the route I took? They can get over there without any problems. My guns are already in place. I lost no time at all. And I suggested that would have been Sachs Bridge. Johnston said that some part of Longstreet's command crossed the same bridge that he did. That would only leave, through process of elimination, Alexander's artillery pieces and the battalions that would support this attack. But there was also a man in the 8th South Carolina, in Kershaw's brigade, that was standing in the road waiting for them to decide where they should go next and how to figure out how to get around this troublesome hill. And they were in columns of 4 in a 16-foot wide road. And these Confederates, skeleton thin in gray and beige uniforms, facial hair, wide-brimmed black hats, most of them young men, 18 to 20-some years of age, standing there in the heat, just baking. There was no shade there, waiting for someone to figure out where they were supposed to go. And there was a fellow in the 8th South Carolina that was in hearing distance of everything I've described to you. And he said Longstreet and McLaws were talking and using language he would not want his young grandson to hear. So, in any case, that would have been one of the officers in the ranks there. And so it was getting testy. It was late in the day. We said sun up is 4:15, sundown 7:15, and my gosh, they're stuck in the backcountry, turning around sometime around a little after 2 p.m. Everyone's on pins and needles. Now, while they were waiting, this is a question that comes out about Samuel Johnston. I'm trying to cover as much of it as I can, so you go back and play the recording later and rethink it. And it's this. People will ask sometimes, so if Johnston went with Longstreet to the front of the lines to speak to McLaws in this pivotal moment when they're stuck, why didn't Samuel Johnston just come in and say, here, let me see that piece of paper I gave you, Lafayette McLaws. This is the map I drew this morning at sunrise, a little afterwards. See on the map, you're supposed to go the route I showed you. Take this route. Why didn't Johnston step in and end the argument, in the mystery, clarify on the piece of paper where McLaws should go, and that would have ended the problem, right? They would have been able to make it over here unseen a lot quicker. Hey, there's the man that wrote the map. Let him step in, and you can ask him personally how to get over there. And the reason is we have a clue given to us why he never stepped in. And again, it's in the synoptic cross comparisons of articles written or letters written after the war between McLaws, in this case, and Johnston. McLaws wrote in his fragments paper, he said, in reading Johnston's letter, he apparently didn't realize that I was following his lead. He apparently didn't realize that he's the only one that reconnoitered that part of the field, and that I was dependent on him to know where to go. And so people read that and they think, yeah, why didn't Johnston was there, he heard the argument, why didn't he just step in and say, time out, let me clarify the map for you, this is where you're supposed to go, this is what I saw this morning. Johnston gives us a really good clue why he never did that. Johnston wrote another letter, this is either to Fitzhugh Lee or to George Peterkin, and in that other letter he says, McLaws thinks that I should have led his troops on the march. And he said, I'm horrified at the thought that he would expect me to lead his troops. Now that's a really big clue as to why he didn't step in and run interference and clarify the map. And it's this, get ready for this. General McLaws and Longstreet were major generals. And he was a captain. Now think about that. Think about that in any work dynamic. A captain stepping in and telling a lieutenant general, Longstreet, and a major general, McLaws, hey, wait a minute, guys. Now, you speak in turn, right? He was probably frightened. That's why he was horrified that McLaws was putting blame on him. He saw himself as a captain and way out of his league in terms of time and grade. He would be later on promoted to a major. We mentioned that in his biography at the beginning. But he was a captain. And so keep that in mind. That's a big point. Now I'm going to make this may be a kind of a corollary point, but I'll make it to play devil's advocate as you think more and more about this, if you do. And it is, engineers were not, it wasn't clear whether engineers, where their rightful place was in time and grade and in rank in the Army. And we've had conversations about this before, some of you, John and Bill and others, about balloon pilots, railroad technicians, and people in general that work for the railroad, clerks and otherwise, and engineers that did route and area reconnaissance. Oftentimes those people were seen outside the circle of the normal promotional system. They were seen, especially balloon operators and folks that you would have to coordinate to use the train to move supplies, they were seen as outside the normal hierarchical scheme. And therefore, how do you deal with them? And their grade may not apply to your grade. And so, who should you speak to first to get them to cooperate? And so that's another factor going on. Though Johnston doesn't mention that specifically, he would have been seen as an outsider. He would have been seen as an outsider. And I'll tell you this, we have folks that will come into the Park Visitor Center from time to time, and they have been contracted by the park. Really good people. We've had a number of subcontractors have done just incredibly valuable work for the park. So this is nothing but a positive compliment to them. But someone brought them in, and they're doing contract work, and they'll maybe be with us for the next 2-3 months in the Park Visitor Center. And I'll be sitting in my office space, and I'll hear them out in the hallway being introduced. And then I'll come out and shake their hand or look for a moment where I can cross paths and welcome them. And though there's a bonding that goes on, we eventually know their name, and we know their children's names, and there's a certain amount of unity that occurs, it's still known they're not in our system. They're a subcontractor. They'll be here for a while, and then they'll be outside the system. That's my best way to try to relate to you the way Johnston would have been seen. So Johnston is a captain, and therefore would have felt reluctant about interfering with the normal chain of command, particularly when there's a major general, a lieutenant general, having a heated conversation. Okay, now we're going to get out my red pen, and this allows us to bring out another finer point by Johnston. He said that for about half of his reconnaissance, this is after he crossed the Red Bridge, he said he made his way up to this ridge, Warfield Ridge. He doesn't call it Warfield Ridge, he calls it the ridge where McLaws and Hood's division would later be into position. He said, I made my way up to this ridge, and he said, and then I followed behind the skirmish line for, he said, at least half of my ride. So where was the skirmish line? Now the skirmish line would have been, as you all look directly east, you can see a beautiful view of Little Round Top and Big Round Top. Isn't that beautiful? I know the PCN cameras have a couple of trees in their way, but maybe they get a shot of it. And the skirmish line would have been very close to the Emmitsburg Road. The Emmitsburg Road is just over this rise, so we're maybe about a football field and a half away from it. That's where the Confederate skirmish line would have been. I'm going to draw in red ink. And it was refused. Refused means bent back at right angles. That's always a defensive posture when you bend your line back. If you bend your line forward in a swing gate, that's offense. When you bend it back, that's defense. And the units that were down here were Scales North Carolinians. As I recollect, the 32nd North Carolina was specifically down here. They would have been spread out, and they were shooting just over this rise. Running parallel with this rise is the Emmitsburg Road. Daniel Sickles' wagon trains were coming up that road. This would have been this would have been A.A. Humphrey's division of 3rd Corps supply wagons coming up the road. That road is the Emmitsburg Road. 8 miles south is Emmitsburg, Maryland. It's also called the road to Frederick, so sometimes it's called the Frederick City Road. That's the road the 3rd Corps would come up. Those are the troops that would defend the Round Tops. Those are the troops that Longstreet would attack. Their wagon trains were coming up as late as 1 p.m. on July 2nd. And some of you know Ken Rich. He's studying to be a guide here, and I've known him for a number of years. He's come out on a number of my tours and given me good insight. And Ken Rich was responsible for 74 trucks and making daily deliveries to BWI, Baltimore Washington International. And he told me, Troy, I knew I was doing my job well if no one knew that I was there. Think about that. In other words, he got in and out, made his deliveries every day to be flown to different parts of the world. And if no one mentioned his name, he meant he did his job. If his name came up, it probably wasn't good. Something was missing. And Ken said that in relation to this, so I give him proper credit, that Sickles' wagon trains coming up that late, I mean, the operations side of the battle condensed to their battlefront and ended by about 6 p.m. on July 1st. This is way after operations ended. This is 1 p.m. the next day, and wagon trains are still coming up the road. And what Ken said to me, he said, all these wagon trains out between the Confederate line of battle, Warfield Ridge, and the Union line of battle, Cemetery Ridge, Round Tops, Wheatfield area, that middle ground out there, that's not where you want your wagon train. That would be like you all cleaning several loads of clothes and then hanging them up on a wire, a clothes wire, in front of your house on the street side of your house. If everybody goes by, sees your laundry. We'll just say it's clean laundry, but there it is, hanging there for them to see. You hang up your laundry, if you hang it out to dry, behind the house, not on the traffic side, not on the car side. So someone really, really messed up here. This logistical wagon shouldn't have been out here where Confederates could take target practice at. They were shooting at the drivers, shooting the horses. It made General Sickles real nervous, and he would send sharpshooters out here. That's another story for another time. Federal cavalry was brought out here, Buford's cavalry, 6th and 9th New York Cavalry, to contest these Confederate skirmishers that Johnston was riding behind, to draw fire away from the wagon trains so they could turn onto what is today Trossel Lane and go behind the Round Tops to near Powers Hill where there were wagon trains. Right, 3,000 ambulances were parked there, 18,000 horses and mules pulling them. Artillery Reserve Park was there, theoretically, with 300 artillery pieces, 6 horses and mules per gun and munition trains. Artillery Reserve Park and Ambulance Park is where those 12th Corps supplies would have gone, behind the Round Tops and south of Powers Hill. Someone should have diverted those logistics behind the Round Tops, probably along Bullfrog Road, 3, 4, 5 miles south of here. They should never have been put out like laundry between the lines so the Confederates could have fun taking target practice shooting at them. Does everybody see that? That's another reason why Sickles was really nervous, but that's also points to someone in logistics made a mistake putting them out there and making Buford have to stay here and cover and defend them. That was the circus that was going on here in the morning when Johnston rode behind the skirmishers. And he said half of his ride was behind this skirmish line. Okay, and that's our transition. We're going to get ready to cross the Emmitsburg Road, and that's where our first water station will be. Okay? And so they'll be waiting for us with buckets of water. Please don't cross until I'm there, until law enforcement helps you. Johnston, he actually wrote 4, but with 3 different people. And one of the points that he makes consistently in his descriptions after the war is he said that he followed behind the skirmishers, so that tells us that we're walking along the correct route. After he crossed the bridge and came up the hill and followed behind the skirmishers, we're following exactly where he said he was. And then he said he followed along the ridge. Well, that's the ridge we've been following. It's called Warfield Ridge, and behind us you can see these woods here. This is Warfield Ridge. So he would have been following just behind the crest of the ridge, he says, toward Round Top. So those are the 2 plumb bob chalk lines he's following. So we know we're on the right track. He was following the ridge toward Round Top.
Was this wooded?
Yes, it was wooded, not quite as thick, but he would have been well behind this ridge, south of it, almost a mile south of it. He would have turned on Ridge Road. And where's Bill?
Right here.
You walked it with me last October, and we actually walked down to Ridge Road, and So when I have smaller groups and it's cooler, different time of the year, we walk down and take the exact route. But trust me, if there's a road there today called Ridge Road, and that's the ridge line that he followed. It essentially conforms to the ridge. So he followed this ridge. This is exactly where a Hood's division would attack from. This woodlot from this ridge. So he scouted it out. That shows that his scouting was good. Hood found it eventually. And he made his way over and around towards Round Top. Thank you so much. So I promise this will be a short stop. I just want you to know we're on the right track. We're following the same ridge that he followed. And so let's do so. We're going to be turning right. And Johnston, on his ride with perhaps 4 other people, including John Clark, made their way between sunrise, a little after 4 a.m., and they concluded around 7 a.m. They made their ride along the ridge, and we're on that ridge now. If you're watching from home, we've been following the ridge the whole time. It's called Warfield Ridge. It's an extension south of Seminary Ridge. If you're watching at home, we're opposite the Round Tops on the southern end of the battlefield, right about where the Alabama Brigade would later make their attack of the Round Tops. And there's a really good view of Big Round Top to the right, Little Round Top to the left. There's a saddle between the two called Warren Avenue, Devil's Den down in the valley below the Round Tops, which would be to the left of your view of the Round Top. The famous wheat field would be further to your left, and the peach orchard even further to your left. This is where the Confederates would try to flank the Union and drive them up the Emmitsburg Road on late afternoon, July the 2nd, 1863, 155 years ago today. Now you see he followed the ridge toward Round Top, so never forget that there was an object to where he was going. It's looking increasingly with the heat, it's 101 heat index, it's looking increasingly like we're not going to go that far. But you have to understand that whether we cut it off earlier and put a conclusion on it short of that, that was his object, was to get to Round Top. Okay, and so he's following the ridge toward Round Top. He said toward, that means that's where he's going. Now, he's also trying to go as far right as practical. That means as far as the vacuum between the Confederate and Union flanks allow on this side of the field. And so anyway, now as he makes this walk, he said that we're gonna draw the ride here. They cross the Sachs Bridge. Okay, hopefully this marker will allow me to write this. And then behind the skirmishers, and then they cross the Emmitsburg Road like we did. That brings up a particular that I left. I would rather bring it up now than miss it altogether, and that is when they got to the road, they were very careful about crossing the road. And in the synoptic study of the letters, Johnston says, this is where he says in one of his letters, he said, the goal of someone doing reconnaissance is to see and not be seen. I mentioned that earlier, but sometimes a redundancy is a good thing. So he said he waited for the cavalry to ride by. Now, the cavalry, what he was thinking was, anytime you see cavalry riding up a road like the Emmitsburg Road, they're usually a vanguard out in front of wheeled vehicles or infantry. For instance, before an infantry goes through a crossroads in a town, such as Gettysburg, the reason Buford's cavalry was sent here first on June the 29th and 30th is they hit the crossroads of Gettysburg and spread out in 4 directions of the compass. Why? To clear the way for the infantry not to walk through an ambush. You see what I'm saying? So anytime you see cavalry, that means something's following them. It's like when you're watching a parade and you see the patrol car, there's probably behind them the first band and a majorette holding a sign, and a band is marching. You're going to see the police car out in front of it first. So he sees that those horses, and they're not moving too quick, but there's these cavalrymen riding, and he waits for them to clear, and he tries to get across without being seen, so that he can see without being seen, and to scamper across with his party of altogether 5, through some window between the vanguard of cavalry he sees and whatever is following them, which might be more wagon trains, it could be infantry. And he finds his window and he crosses. And then he says in one of his letters, he said, I don't think they ever saw him. So he wasn't sure. But he said then they got across the road, and after they crossed the Emmitsburg Road, behind this ridge, he said they followed the ridge. That was the contour of the ridge is what they were following, towards Round Top. He said he turned and he said he went through the area where there was a cavalry battle fought later on July 3rd. Right, these are crucial. I remember when I was first doing this work, I thought it was putting these letters together, the findings would be cryptic. I thought he couldn't have known where he was going. That's why the attack was so late getting started, so on and so forth. There must be something to this, that Johnston did a poor reconnaissance. But as you read his letters, he gives you, if you know the battlefield like many of you do real well, he gives you a clear, conspicuous demarcations where he was. The ridge, we followed the ridge all the way behind the skirmish line. We know where they were, where they shot at the wagons. He crossed the Emmitsburg Road. He says that by name. And then he says that he comes out where there was a cavalry battle later on July 3rd. Well, the cavalry battle, as many of you know, was Farnsworth's famous cavalry charge. And over here, the first wooded hill you see is known as Bushman Hill. And inside that hill is rocks, arguably as larger than Devil's Den. Most people never make it back in there, but there are trails that lead back to it. They're called Potter's Rocks. How many of you have heard of them? Potter's Rocks, because the 18th Pennsylvania Cavalry set up a post there on July 3rd to threaten the Confederate flank while Pickett's charge was going on well north of here. And Potter drew a sketch, and somehow or another, the family, some future descendants of his, donated them to the National Archives. We got a copy of it in our park archives now, his sketch of the rocks, so we know exactly where the 18th Pennsylvania Cavalry was on July 3rd, trying to threaten Longstreet's flank, make them uncomfortable on the third and final day of the battle, try to flush them out of here, get them to retreat back to where we started our tour. And Potter's Rocks is right over there. In those woods, right along that woods, on this side, parallel with Bushman Hill Woods, is a lane there known as Bushman Lane. It leads out to the Bushman Farm over to your left, very near where General Hood would have his arm wounded on July the 2nd in late afternoon by an artillery shell, probably from the area of the peach orchard. And then along Bushman Lane, that's the access that Kilpatrick's cavalry used to threaten Longstreet's flank on July 3rd, divert strength away from supporting Pickett's charge. And if you walk into the woods of Bushman Hill, between there and Big Round Top, there's a monument there to William Wells from Vermont. He led the 1st Vermont Cavalry through there in a charge against some Texas and Alabama troops at the base of Big Round Top on July 3rd, 24 hours after our study. But Johnston references it. He said, my reconnaissance went right through where they had the July 3rd cavalry battle. Well, that's pretty clear, isn't it, where he was? And the monuments to Kilpatrick's cavalry all clustered around Big Round Top, first of the largest hills that you see. One to William Wells, also the 5th New York Cavalry, the 1st West Virginia Cavalry, the 1st Vermont Cavalry, the 5th New York, all their monuments are there. And if you climb Big Round Top on this side, that's on its western side, there's an open lot called D Field. It's called D Field because a fellow by the name of Parsons, who was in that charge with Farnsworth's cavalry on July the 3rd to flush Longstreet's men out, get them on the move after the failure of Pickett's charge, catch them in a defeated moment. Maybe they'll fall back, break contact. And but through there, Farnsworth's cavalry, at least, part of the 1st Vermont, went through D Field. Now, why is it called D Field? Parsons, who wrote the account, drew a map for his readers. It later appeared in Battles and Leaders, the Century magazine in New York. And in his map, it's a dotted line, the whole route the 1st Vermont Cavalry made to try to fire at the Confederates and flush them out. And he has different stops for you to take to walk the route the Vermont Cavalry did in their charge. And there's A, B, C, and when you come to D, that's where he says Farnsworth was killed. And you all have been to Farnsworth's restaurants. I mentioned Dobbin earlier, and there's so many wonderful restaurants in Gettysburg. Highly recommend you go to all of them today. But there's one named after that's hard, isn't it? Yes. Mason Dixon is terrific. So is the Parrot. So is the Blue and Gray. So is the Pub. Mama V's. O'Rourke's, Gary Owen, and then even more. They're all fantastic. Cashtown Inn, Hare Ridge, Gettysburg Eddie's is outstanding, and just all of them are fantastic people. And I honestly have not had a bad meal, and visit them all frequently. Now, yes, I visit them all frequently. Now, along Farnsworth's cavalry charge and went through D Field, and he may or may not have been killed there. There have been people that have taken issue with that in recent years. Some of you know Andy Custer, through marriage related to the famous Union general. She's written a couple of articles for Blue and Gray arguing her, this is kind of side information, but it's good information, and you might find it, I never know what I'm going to say that intrigues somebody. It might not be what I intended to say. What she went back and found Parsons' original account, the one that's not in Battles and Leaders, the one that was unedited, and it's in the National Archives, and she found that he wrote an introduction that got cropped out of the published version. And in the introduction, he says, I must qualify what I'm about to say, and that I didn't see the whole charge. I wasn't with Farnsworth when he was killed. He didn't make it that far. Parsons admits it. And then he goes on to say that he has a source, and then we find out later it was a Confederate source. The Confederate describes the man as having a white shirt. When they did the autopsy on him at the train station on Farnsworth later on, he was not wearing a white shirt. So that she's found enough inconsistencies in the story. First and foremost, Parsons admits, as a disqualifier, I didn't see him actually get killed. So it's led to a whole debate within the cavalry community on whether he was actually killed in D Field or not. I just say that for you. You'll run across it later. I should probably say that, cover my own tracks if you start reading about it. But for our purposes, Samuel Johnson said he went to where there was this cavalry battle later on July 3rd. So that's where it occurred, between Bushman Hill and Big Round Top. That's where all Kilpatrick's cavalry monuments are related to the fighting to the South Cavalry Field. There are a few other stray ones, but your biggest cluster are right there. And then I went beyond Hood's position. Well, Hood on July the 2nd started his attack from this ridge, proceeded down into the valley. Hood's troops, Hood's division, about half of Longstreet's corps. You're talking about, maybe around 5,000 to 6,000 men. They descended down into this valley, and Hood's division attacked from your right to left. Little Round Top, Devil's Den, the wheat field, and they even extended some troops up towards the Peach Orchard, although primarily McLaws would attack the Peach Orchard directly on. And he said, he says it in his synoptic letters as we cross-compare, he said, I went beyond Hood's position during the battle. Hood's position was down there. He said, I went beyond that. That means he went beyond Big Round Top. Big Round Top was Hood's position. That's where Hood was. And then the wheat field. And if we're talking about Tig Anderson, if we're talking about Evander Law, if we're talking about Joseph Kershaw, I mean, these troops attack Henry Benning, his Georgians. Hood's line was essentially Big Round Top and further to the west. So he said he went beyond that point. Oh my! So that's clear that he went a long way. Remember, his orders were to go as far to the right as practicable. All right, I'm going to sort of leave you hanging suspended there for a minute for one more stop, and we'll pull it all together. And then. Okay, so here we go. You'd have to pick the right horses not to cause a stir, not to get jittery, and so everything about this was concealed. And he said they came out to where there would be a cavalry battle later on July 3rd. They would have gone right through this low funnel here that divides Warfield Ridge on your left to Bushman Hill on your right. Now the reason he would have gone through that low ground is you can access it from Ridge Road on the other side of Warfield Ridge. We actually have permission today from George Peck to go over onto his property over on Ridge Road. He told me to come on over and so forth if I had time, and we've sort of run out of time. We're not going to be able to do it. But he gave the invitation if you want to go over on your own and talk to him for a little while. You can see Ridge Road. You're very close to the road that Johnston and his party took. And they accessed this low defile between Warfield Ridge and Bushman Hill, the reason they would have gone through the low defile is to not be seen. And for the same reason the cavalry would have come through this low defile on July the 3rd. There were Confederate artillery pieces on the ridge. You go through a low defile and you're on a horse, you're under those guns. They can't depress their muzzles with parabolic trajectory and fire down on you. Can you see that? So it's a safe way to cut through and through Confederate lines, divide up their artillery, mutual support from their infantry. And so it gives cover and concealment to be in really low ground. So that's the way he would have come through. He said where there was the cavalry fight later on. He said he went beyond the position held by Hood. We said that would be Big Round Top. That's where his troops were repulsed back to after they fought on Little Round Top and Devil's Den. And he said he made it all the way up onto Little Round Top. And he was very specific about this. He said that we had a commanding view. Now, why would he make all that up? You know, there's no reason for him to make that up. Now, commanding view. Well, if you're an engineer, and in this case you're an intelligence gatherer, you want a commanding view. My son, after mowing a lot of grass and doing odds and ends jobs, he put his money together, and we put some money with it for Christmas and helped him get a really nice little drone. About $1,000. He had one of the cheaper ones. It was $120, and he filled up to this thing. So it has, you can use an iPhone and fly it. You can send that thing up, and with proper permissions in the right place, and we always do that. He can take pictures of people's houses from above if they want to sell their house, you know, through some real estate company. He's there to be able to do that kind of work for them. And he'll send that thing up, and it can go way, way up. I mean, it's amazing, and the thing can travel great speeds. It'll just take off. I heard recently where some postal delivery service, I don't know if it was actually UPS or not, well, postal service experimented with a drone. This is just a few months ago. Carried 500 pounds mail with a drone, remote control. That's the wave of the future, by the way. Sort of like the Jetsons. That's where we're headed. And so soldiers on the ground do that in Afghanistan. They come up to a hill. They don't know what's on the other side. One of the unit leaders will open up this nice plush case that's somewhat armored, and there's cushion inside, and they take out a drone. It has remote control. They fly it over the hill they're about to walk into, take pictures. It's sent back to a truck. It's carefully analyzed. I mean, they can even see below ground with some of these things, the satellite imagery and all. And then fly it back to the case, close it. When it's deemed safe, they cross the hill. So everybody got that? So we have right now, we have satellite capacity, and this is called three-dimensional war, by the way, which really came to fruition during World War II, where you could fight three-dimensional. You could fly over your opponent's head. They had hot air balloons during the Civil War, but they also had, this is the era before smokeless gunpowder, about 30 years, so after the first rounds of artillery were fired, you had no three-dimensional view. You know, we have satellite abilities now to watch countries in the world where America and other nations have had disputes with them. You fill in the blanks there. We have that ability now. So a high view from a place like Little Round Top would be what Johnston would want from the beginning of his reconnaissance. You can see everything. It reveals everything. What's your goal? It's to do an area reconnaissance and a route reconnaissance. Route, so the troops know where to march and maneuver to get into position. Area, so that you can see your enemy's position, you know exactly how many troops to attack with, and you know exactly where they are. And so he said he had a commanding view. And then in the synoptic comparisons, he wrote another letter where he said, when I returned to headquarters, he said, I found Lee, Longstreet, and Hill looking at a map. The map they were looking at was likely the Jedediah Hotchkiss map. Let me stop to point this out a minute. Not only was Johnston and his crew drawing on a map, but there was an existing map. It's the Jedediah Hotchkiss map. Hotchkiss was from near Syracuse, New York, left the North, fought for the South during the war, traveled with Richard Ewell's Corps during the Gettysburg campaign, drew maps on the fly all during the campaign, all the way out to York, Pennsylvania, and up through the first day of where Ewell's movements were related to the attack north of town at Barlow's Knoll. there's an interesting account of when Jubal Early on June 26th came through Gettysburg. He went up to the Globe Inn. It was like a large hotel. It was right next to the town square. And the the owner of the inn came out on the porch to talk to Jubal Early and his staff, mounted on horses. These are Confederate officers, and it wouldn't have been a pleasant thing. But at some point, the person who ran the inn looked past Jubal Early from the inn porch. He looked at Jubal Early on his horse and looked behind him and saw another officer, Confederate officer, in the background, and he said, "I know you. You were here last winter." And is that 100% no? But that was likely Jedediah Hotchkiss. He was sent up here by Stonewall Jackson in quote-unquote utmost secrecy. He drew a map of this entire area 5 months before the Battle of Gettysburg, so it could be used. The Confederates didn't travel willy-nilly to Pennsylvania. They even had Gary Gallagher years ago put out a companion for the map, originally put together by Hotchkiss. The original's in Hanley Public Library, by the way, in Winchester, Virginia. And the companion identifies some of the surnames on the map, and there are hundreds of surnames. That's last names of people that are in the map. Northern Virginia, Central Maryland, South Central Pennsylvania. He puts a compendium, a little corollary attachment, that next to these surnames, it tells you whether they're sympathetic to the South or not. So that's how detailed the map was. So that map was put together by Hotchkiss. Now, but Hotchkiss, if you look at the Hotchkiss map, I thought about bringing it out here. I have a framed picture of it on my wall. It's this big, and then I thought about Garrett or Sean carrying it, and I thought that's just not fair, and it's probably supposed to be near 100 degrees. And it's really heavy, and it's behind glass. But if you look at the map, it says July 1, 2, and 3, but clearly all of his maps said July 1, 2, and 3, and it only represents July 1. And it would have been the map that Lee, Longstreet, and Hill were looking at when Samuel Johnston arrived at the seminary to show him where he had been. And guess what the map is missing? The map is complete for everything on July 1, from Barlow's Knoll all the way over to Bender's Hill east of town. It's got all of that. What it doesn't have is anything to do with the routes that we've talked about today. So that's what Johnston was trying to do, is to fill in that map. So when Johnston said he got back, he said he went back regardless of fences. I know I mentioned that earlier. After he got across the Red Bridge, he just went back as quick as he could get across lots. And he says about 7 a.m., Lee, Longstreet, and Hill were all looking at the map, tracing the map, and he said Lee looked up at me and told him to come over. All of them were excited and sort of anxious that Johnston had returned. Johnston said, I traced for them with my finger on their map where the reconnaissance had been. And then he said, when I got to Little Round Top, Lee said, you got that far? Question mark. And he said, I assured him I did. Now again, that's hard to disagree with. It isn't. Okay, so now we're talking about an engineer that worked in northern New Jersey in the Industrial Revolution and oversaw railroads in Georgia, was promoted to major, was considered the best locator of railroads that I've ever met. And we're talking about a person like that being lost or confused. And he writes that over and over a 20-year period. He said he got there. And remember, his job was to go as far as to the right and to the Union left as practical. And so that's what he said he did. Now, when he got up there, he said he had a commanding view, and he assured Lee that he got there. Now, he said into Lafayette McLaws, he said it was beyond the position held by Hood, so that's Little Round Top also. That's our cross-reference. And he gets to Little Round Top, and he wrote to McLaws in a letter in 1892. He said that he saw the enemy's position. He says that clearly. He said the reason, he told McLaws, he said the reason Longstreet wanted me to go with the Corps was not because I was high rank and I could tell you all what to do in so many words, but he said because I had done the reconnaissance, the route that you were following and the places you were going I was the one that had conducted that reconnaissance, and I might have information that would be considered valuable to General Longstreet. That's very close to verbatim to what he said. And then in that same sequence, he said, and to give you all information about where the enemy's position is. Well, position is a loaded word. Now, he's telling you he knew where the enemy's position is. Now, this is a map by Phil Lano showing the position of Union troops on the left as they would have been when Johnston and his party were over here in the morning. And so from Little Round Top, what they would have been able to look down and see, remember sunup is 4:15, so it's daylight when they get over here. What they would have been able to see is David Birney's division. Now, you know, part of it's in a woodlot, I recognize that. However, there's campfire smoke, right? They've been there for hours since 6 p.m. the night before. They had to boil their coffee, cook their meals. Humphrey's division is way out in the open and very visible. They were in a place called Cadori Thicket. Next, Geary. Geary is right here. He's 12th Corps. How many of you did the Geary walk with me last week? And we walked that for a couple hours, and where Geary was. Geary would later be known for fighting where? Culp's Hill. But on July 1st, he was covering Hancock's left and the left of the army. And in the morning of July 2nd, when Johnston was scouting this area, Geary started to pull out around 4:30 a.m. to march over to Culp's Hill. So when Johnston got here, if he left around sunup, he would have been over here as those men were marching out of here. But now what Phil Lano doesn't show is Geary, and if you're with me last weekend, you saw this, Geary had skirmishers all the way out to the peach orchard. This is David Ireland's 137th New York from Binghamton. The Syracuse boys from the 149th New York. These belong to Pat Green, George Sears Green, 62-year-old commander. His regiments were out there on the skirmish line behind Buford. So you'd have also had you would have also had out there the 5th Ohio from Cincinnati, the 147th Pennsylvania under Aereo Pardee. A skirmish line is only 1/10 of your force, but all these folks were thrown out in that direction to the west, beyond the wheat field, in the area of the Rose Farm, in the shadow of the peach orchard. They were behind 6th and 9th New York Cavalry under Buford. Also, you'll notice Buford in this picture. Can you all see Buford down here in the bottom? Buford's cavalry on July 2nd in the morning. You see the white frame buildings? That's the Catherine and John Slider Farm. And just beyond that is Devil's Den, and on the other side of that, maybe a half mile from where we're standing, a little over a half mile, is Crawford Avenue and Plum Run. That's at the base of Little Round Top. That's where Buford's troops were watering their horses while they were still guarding Sickles left before they actually began to leave sometime around 9 a.m. to head towards Taneytown and then later Westminster. So there was cavalry that would have been visible for Samuel Johnston, as well as Geary's skirmishers out towards the wheat field and the peach orchard. Talking about the 8th Illinois, the 12th Illinois, the 6th New York, the 9th New York, the 18th Pennsylvania. All of them were in the vicinity of the Emmitsburg Road, one side or the other, protecting the flank, taking turns trying to stop Confederate skirmishers from shooting at the wagon trains. Everybody got a good picture as I try to paint a picture for you? So there's a lot of troops, and you've got elements of Buford's cavalry, Birney and Humphrey's division, 3rd Corps. That's about 9,500 troops. Buford may have had around 1,600, probably a little less, cavalry. Geary's division, that's 12th Corps was an undersized corps, but Geary's division of 12th Corps was probably around 3,500 men. So you're easily talking about 14,000 men within close proximity of where Johnston would have been able to view with his commanding view that he had from Round Top. And he told McLaws in one of his letters that I was sent with Longstreet's corps, that essentially includes you, because I knew where the enemy's position was. So he saw the enemy's position. He tells us that plainly. And now, how did he get up there without being seen? Well, there have been people, I mean, these are questions that are coming out. I know we're getting to the very end. We're down to just a handful of minutes left. But I'm also thinking that if this gets played again and again and again, it's important to put these things in for somebody that, in the coolness of their home, that looks at it a little bit later and asks me questions later. Who was on Little Round Top at that time? A signal station. And the signal station, I mentioned them earlier, I don't want to be redundant, but they were up there with their glasses, your field glasses, and with their scopes, watching campfires at night, and what they would do is, when they saw something, they would wave a large red flag. Let's say they were wigwam it 3 times and then once forward. Well, if you're on Cemetery Hill on a crudely built tower a mile and a half north, and you're looking through your field glasses and you see that particular movement, you turn your cipher disc, and that's the letter H or L. That's how they communicated by air. That's called aerial telegraphy or semaphore communication. There was a signal station also 12 miles west at Jack's Mountain on July 3rd. They saw Pickett's charge march in from a reverse direction, and signaled the Cemetery Hill signal station got it. The one on Little Round Top didn't because of Confederate sharpshooting at Little Round Top from Devil's Den. And then the Confederates discovered they were being watched from a reverse angle, and they went up and captured the signal station, but not before their whole position was given away. So these signal stations were working really well. That signal station was up there as early as 11 p.m. on July 1st. Again, looking for campfires. They would, if they wanted to signal at night, they would wave torches. Am I painting a good picture? Okay. So that signal station was there. Johnston's party of 5 would have been in civilian clothing and trying to quote-unquote get as near to the enemy and see and not be seen. They could have gone on to Vincent Spur. How many of you know where Vincent Spur is? 16th Michigan marker, 44th New York monument. So a plateau there where Vincent's brigade defended. 20th Maine defended there, so did the 83rd Pennsylvania. They could have stood right where the 16th Michigan marker is. Norvell Welch's Detroit, Michigan boys could have stood right there on that shelf. Vincent Spur, south slope, a Little Round Top, and you have that same view, and you wouldn't be seen by the signal station at the summit. They would have never known you're there. All they had to do, somebody demonstrated if the camera would point in that direction. Would one of you stand up and go behind the tree and see how well we see you behind the tree? Would one of you be willing to do that? And, okay, the fellow in the straw hat, raise your hand. Okay, can you see him on the camera? Now go behind the tree. That's Samuel Johnston. You have a view and stand behind the tree. Right, so he would have a view. He could see and not be seen. You can learn a lot more, he said, Lee told him, from his experience in the Mexican War. By traveling in small groups, you don't create quite the same ruckus. So that's how he did it. So he sees the Union position, and he then said that he talked topography with Lee. That also points to it being an area reconnaissance. Did you all know that in Johnston's resume, he cited the Confederate guns on Marie's Heights at Fredericksburg for the battle there, December 13th, 1862. He cited the Confederate guns there. He cited the Confederate guns for the Battle of Chancellorsville, too. So that means he understands topography, not just where to get water, to pick up water. It was the best thing for the artillery to do was to follow Marsh Creek and cross Sachs Bridge because they could fill up their water there. Don't think that's by accident. The fact that Alexander got into position before 3:30 and lost no time and knew exactly where Warfield Ridge was and knew exactly where to post their guns, and there were no arguments about where to post them in relation to the Confederate position. How do you think he knew that? Okay, that topography, where you should put your guns. The highest crest, where's the military crest? We don't have time to go into all of that about the ideal place to post artillery for long-range fire versus close-range canister fire. Those are the kind of conversations they had. These are two experts at what they do. So Johnston carries that information back. And then we come to our final point. And I remember the first time I read this, and I couldn't believe it. I went back and reread it again. It's just before Johnston tells Lafayette McLaws, don't publish this. Don't publish this. I don't want to get involved in Longstreet's demise. He was good to me. Don't publish this. I'm just giving you the facts of where I was. I want to stay out of this. And I think that's why we find the paper as a fragment paper rather than a published one today. I think McLaws' conscience, and you may find where it was published in some form, and I don't mind you finding out and let me know later on. I've never seen the published version of it. But in there, I remember reading, it was near that caveat at the end, don't publish this, and he said to McLaws, he said, the first evidence, remember this, I almost called the program by this name. Johnston said to McLaws, the first evidence all day of the Union forces on our right being ready to oppose was right after we began the attack. The first evidence that they were ready to oppose. Now McLaws took it and twisted it in his fragments paper, twisted it, contorted it. He wrote, Johnston said that the first Union troops seen all day at the peach orchard were when we began the attack. And I'll add around 4 o'clock. And he wrote, everyone knows that Sickles was within vicinity of the peach orchard for hours. And it's really unfortunate. Some people will read that and don't realize that Johnston's been taken out of context. Johnston never said that. Johnston said very carefully, the first evidence that the enemy was ready to oppose all day was right after we began attacking. And what he was saying, ready to oppose, are key words. He's already told you he saw the position. But what he's telling you, they were not ready to oppose. We know that from looking at the Union side. It's very easy to cross-reference from looking at the Union side, because Sickles and Meade couldn't agree on where Sickles was supposed to be. Meade made it clear in his mind, sent a map over known as the William Payne map. And by the way, I have that map. Just remember that. This was the map that Sickles got in the morning on where he was supposed to be. Try to get this on camera. This is a very rare map. We have it in our archives, and I had a chance to have it blown up thanks to the Gettysburg Frame Shop. But here's the area down here of the peach orchard, and I want you to notice, let me see if I can get my bearings here correctly. This is Tawnytown Road. Here's your peach orchard out here, excuse me. This is a sketch done by William Payne, a cartographer for Commanding General Meade, showing the dispositions of each of the Union Corps and where they were supposed to go. And these were distributed on the morning of July 2nd. And Sickles took issue with it, and General Meade's son, who was on the Commanding General staff, came over to clarify it. Sickles was not happy with the position. But if you could point it back towards the camera in just a moment, I want you to see where General Meade had Sickles' position, 3rd Corps, to be, and where the artillery was to be. It was not on the Emmitsburg Road, obviously, but it was not on Little or Big Round Top. It's somewhere in between. And if you paid careful attention to the Phil Lano map, he shows Sickles in the same place. Sickles' original line is designated by Army headquarters through his cartographer and through follow-up instructions was for Sickles to be in the wheat field with his left, and his right to be in front of what is now the Pennsylvania Memorial, a good few hundred yards out in front of what is now known as Cadore Thicket. The idea that Sickles was on Cemetery Ridge is fallacy. He was never on Cemetery Ridge at any point until after the second day's fight, when they fell back there. Sickles' orientation to the battlefield was the Emmitsburg Road. That's how he accessed the battlefield, and he turned off, had his wagon trains go behind Cemetery Ridge, but his troops were positioned in the area of the wheat field. That's out to your front, to the west. The Confederates were right in that the Union were not ready to oppose. You could argue it's Sickles' fault, that's fine. But because Sickles took issue with where he was, and he and Meade wouldn't come to exact terms on where he was, at least in Sickles' mind. They never really settled on where they were supposed to be. And for a good part of July 2nd, Sickles' troops were in camp. Not in a position, but in camp. So they were not ready to oppose. Their weapons would have been stacked all around Plum Run in front of the Round Top. So they were not ready to oppose. Then there's another factor to what ready to oppose means, and this is a rebel perspective. From the Confederate perspective, the Confederates' objective on this part of the battlefield was not, its primary objective was the peach orchard. The reason why Lee continued the battle on the third day with Pickett's charges is because he captured the peach orchard on July 2nd, which he could use as an artillery platform to fire up Cemetery Ridge to support attacks up the Emmitsburg Road. Can you see that? Lee wanted the peach orchard, so for Samuel Johnston to say that the Union Army was not ready to oppose during his reconnaissance, it meant they were not ready to oppose the position that Lee wanted, which was the peach orchard. Does everybody see that? And not ready to oppose on Little Round Top either. We all know from reading Union perspectives that Little Round Top was not defended. There might have been a signal station up there, but there was no defense there until Strong Vincent, very close to 4 p.m. on July 2nd, 1863. So when Samuel Johnson said they were not ready to oppose when he did his reconnaissance, it meant the peach orchard and Little Round Top could be taken without opposition. Can you see that? And I think I hinted at this earlier, but this is a critical point to make. When two lines of battles draw up on a battlefield, typically in a Civil War, it's two parallel ridges, like a cemetery and Cemetery Ridge. They're usually a mile apart. Typically, they'll put skirmishers out in no man's land. The skirmishers and the sharpshooters representing 1/10 of the force. If they're fighting defensively, they will shoot at any oppositional force that tries to remove fences. Why? Because they know they're defending. They want to turn their opponent's main attack later into a track and field hurdle contest as they're jumping fences. They want to create as many impediments, obstacles as they can, and they try to keep fences in play. Skirmishers also shoot at artillerymen to pin them down, to degrade, diminish, and to discourage artillery from going forward on offense if they know they're within the range of sharpshooters. Everybody see it? And they shoot at anyone with a star or insignia on their sleeve. Sharpshooters fill up the vacuum between the mile spacing of middle ground between lines of battle on a Civil War battlefield. However, here's your very, very important point. If there is some uncontested part in no man's land by one side, in the mile of middle ground, that's uncontested by sharpshooters or anyone, one side is sending a message to the other side non-verbally, and it's crystal clear. You can have that for free. We're not contesting it. You know, during World War I, they put up barbed wire. They didn't just fight to keep fences. They put barbed wire. But if you're not putting up some kind of obstacle between you and your main position, you're sending a message. You can have that for free. Your opponent will fill the vacuum as far as practical. So what Johnston did is he went as far to the Union left as practical to see how far it was. It's like you taking a hammer and hitting drywall, and there's a hollow sound, and you continue to hit the drywall, and you're waiting to hear a distinct sound when you find the stud. It's a distinct sound, and you know then where to put the nail. What Johnston was doing was going through this vacuum as far as practicable to find the stud. That would be where the Union left was. And he made it to Round Top, where he had a commanding view, where he heard men coughing and horses where he saw, as I try to paint the picture, where he saw campfires and where he saw evidence in the movements and the men's and the shouts and occasionally a bugle sound of reveille and so forth. He heard all of that, saw all of that, said he saw the position, was crystal clear about that in one of his letters to McLaws, and then got out of there the best way he could. But when he said that Little Round Top was unoccupied, he got that far. Lee said, "You got that far?" He said, "I assured him I did." And that there was only cavalry guarding the peach orchard. You remember he had to look both ways and he didn't think they saw him, but that's cavalry. That's not a real defense. That kind of information to Lee, Longstreet, and Hill, and particularly to Lee, information that neither the Peach Orchard or Little Round Top were ready to oppose, Lee's response was to Longstreet, I think you had better move on. Thank you all for coming out.